The ancient hermetic wisdom states that every truth is a half-truth. On this walk, we shall discuss how the communication funnel of the mind conceptualizes reality into manageable ideas and categories, at the expense of a lesser understanding of greater perspectives. When observing reality, the intelligent mind assimilates what it perceives by putting what is perceived into concepts and ideas. This is a means for cognition of what is perceived, but also useful when communicating that which is perceived to another individual. As you may know, in your life, there are somewhat different modes of perspectives. And what I am doing here is I am using my intelligence to try and conceptualize these different modes of perspectives in order for you to get an idea. Now, when engaging in work that requires a tremendous amount of focus, some form of studying or research, something that really puts you into a laser-focused mindset, the perspective becomes narrow and funneled into the point at which you are focusing, the goal at which you are focusing. And please don't take this as it may have a negative connotation, mentioning words such as narrow, but it's just a mode of a perspective. Now, on the flip side, however, there's also a much more broader mode of perspective, a much larger perspective, very vast, a perspective that stretches beyond the horizons of these smaller goals that you could be engaged in otherwise. Now, the general projection of society today is the emphasis on one form of intelligence, and that is problem solving at the very focused, narrow, pinpointed view or perspective. And when looking at the school and education systems, throughout the child's or young adult's life, they are put through rigorous training in order to really streamline and perfect this intelligence. Different individuals come out with different modes or different levels of intelligence. But essentially, individuals are sharpening their intelligence for as long as they can, so that their intelligence can cut through problems. Once you split a problem in half, you may see the center of the problem, and so you can solve the problem. Now, since everything in life, and one of the main laws in life is the law of duality. Everything has its opposite. black and white, white and black, light and dark, dark and light, day and night, night and day. Everything has its opposites. And so the opposite of one perspective is the opposite of the other, and so forth. Now, no side of the poles is better than the other. And it is absurd to prefer any side of the poles here, because it is all on the same spectrum. And since you are on the same spectrum, you are bound to change. And this is one of the main laws, if understood, could allow you to transcend a lot of suffering. But for this specific topic, the other end of what society is trying to hone in every individual is the broader, larger perspective of reality. Because the larger, broader perspective of reality shows you a larger image and where one fits within this image. And in one way you could say that this is the source of identity. Because as far as most individuals go, the greatest, vastest thing there is their identity in one way or another. Because as soon as their identity is in danger, they will do everything in order to protect their identity. And this doesn't have to be a physical danger. Their identity may hold to a certain belief or an idea, and if this idea or belief is challenged, they shall do everything in their power to protect this idea, because if this idea is broken, along comes their identity, also broken and fragmented. So the true power lies in honing both sides of the perspectives. The much larger, broader perspective, this is what many people refer to as spirituality. And many aspects of spirituality, or going in that direction, may be counterintuitive, or may seem that it's counterintuitive, because there is no form of production, there's no form of outcome. If you are focused on a certain problem, if you are focused on trying to develop a business, solving all these small problems that get in the way of the business could eventually make you rich. And so there's somewhat of a immediate or short-term outcome. However, when going in the other direction of broadening the perspective, seeing beyond the small activities of humans, this could seem like you are being lazy. What is the point? Because seeing the pointlessness of some of the activities that we engage in makes it difficult for us to perhaps engage in productive activities once again. And so the power truly lies within the balance of the two. But one should be given its own light, for sure. And the way I'm communicating this to you is that I have given two sides. The small zoomed in perspective and the larger zoomed out perspective. And of course, this form of communicating does not take you to neither of the perspectives. And so the communication have fragmented the reality of what I am talking about in order to make it easier to pass on the idea. But essentially, if you bring the zoomed in perspective into the broader perspective, this is where these judgments arise. Because the judging aspect of you comes from the zoomed in perspective, the smaller perspective. And so these judgments will say, this is pointless. What is this? What's the point? This is scary. This is so and so and so on forth. And so viewing a larger, much larger perspective, a perspective that is beyond the identity, would have to mean that whatever comes with the identity, in other words, the smaller zoomed in perspective, should be quietened in order to really perceive the larger perspective. But the same thing happens on the other side. When you are engaging in a problem, a very zoomed in problem, on the smaller perspective, you shouldn't bring the larger perspective with you. Or you shouldn't use what is observed in the larger perspective to necessarily dictate what should be done. Because the larger perspective may then dictate that this is pointless. There's no need. And so there has to be a balance between the two perspectives. Hone both. Allow your identity to be in the larger perspective. And allow the identity to carry the sharpness of the smaller perspective. Because if your identity and the sharpness both derive from a very small perspective, your reasoning in life or the goal or the motivation to use this sharp intelligence will be perhaps more selfish, because the center of your universe is the identity. But if you perceive a perspective beyond your own identity, something larger than yourself. For an example, some people engage in simple activities such as meditation or stargazing, really looking at the stars, seeing how small you are. This humbles you. This humbles one's person. And humbling yourself means that, hey, I might as well engage in the most moral activities. I might as well not be so rude to other individuals because it's pointless. And so having such a heightened perception or a heightened level of morality, along with the sharp intelligence, the sharp zoomed in intelligence, is powerful, because you are now solving small problems in order to allow the larger infinite perspective to carry out what it needs to carry out, or to carry out whatever it's carrying out. Before moving on to the next stage of this talk or walk, I shall use the analogy of beauty. So I may ask you, what is beauty? Now each individual you'll find will have a different perception of beauty, or the meaning of beauty is relative to the individual. Beauty is relative to the eyes of the beholder, you may have heard. This is what you would call the smaller zoomed in perspective. The smaller zoomed in perspective is unique to each individual, and for sure, if beauty is interpreted using the smaller zoomed in perspective, for sure it is different. For sure it is relative to the individual. But if stepping out of this plane of individuality, if we look at beauty without using our own judgment, without using our own bias, without thinking what others may think of what beauty is, without using what we know of beauty so far, you are forcing yourself to go in the opposite direction. I am having a difficult time calling the zoomed in perspective and the larger perspective opposites. They are not really opposites. They are one within the whole sort of thing. But essentially going into the larger perspective, when reviewing beauty there, it could only be perceived. There could be no words that could describe what beauty really is at this point. The mind should be in awe when perceiving beauty. And that's exactly what awe is. The mind has been quietened. It has stayed in its right place. It has said that, or it has given up trying to conceptualize that which is so much greater and beyond itself. And so I really hope that this walk serves for you to understand that there is more to the very small zoomed in perspective of life, where we are the center of the universe. Perhaps we are not the center of the universe. This is especially interesting, this topic. It's especially interesting when discussing truth. The truth. The truth of life. What is the truth of life? The truth of life can be looked at once again through both perspectives, but it hasn't been looked at so often through the much broader, larger perspective of life. But even when viewing truth from such a broad and large perspective, it becomes extremely difficult to communicate, because once again, like beauty, the mind will be in awe of the truth. When perceiving that truth and trying to write down what is being perceived, no words will come out, or way too many words will come out. The nature of reality is that everything is connected. In the intro we said that the ancient hermetic wisdom states that every truth is a half-truth. And this comes from the interweaved and interconnectedness of all of reality. Everything is in duality, everything has its opposites, everything has its poles, and so once you pull out one pole, you are pulling out the entire spectrum. And this is the problem when trying to communicate the truth. The only way communication can take place is if reality is being fragmented into a manageable idea, so that the other person may understand this manageable idea. But as you pull out a fragment of reality, you are pulling out all of its webs of polarities. You are pulling out whatever is stuck to it. So imagine a fly that flies into a spider web. If you try to save this fly from the spider web and pull it out of the web, you are pulling out fragments of the web itself as well. And so this is the nature of reality. When we try to speak of truth, we are pulling truth out of reality. And what is the opposite of truth? Untruth. And for this reason has it been stated that every truth is but a half-truth. As soon as it's communicated, it's become a half-truth. There is more to it than just this idea. And so honesty is the recognition of this. By being honest with oneself, you can see that whatever is being communicated or whatever idea has been fragmented, of course, has its elements of untruths. And so very often, many times when individuals are speaking of the truth, or speaking of a much larger, broader perspective, that words essentially cannot really reach, but it's been put into words and fragmented into manageable ideas. Many people often become seduced by the words, rather than understanding and seeing where these words, or what these words are referring to. And this is the basis of entire religions. Religions is essentially a system that has been put together by language. Many different rules and systems that have to be followed. But once you try to put the infinite reality into a system, this is where it becomes extremely difficult to take yourself and perceive this reality. And so you should be able to do both. You should be able to step out of any system you are binded by, and then step back in, and step out, and step back in, so that you can see the internal aspects of the system and the external, so that you could perceive the zoomed in perspective of life and the zoomed out perspective of life. Essentially, so that you could see. Thank you once again for walking along. See you on the next walk.